To me, I have been in here so long that if a little poem called Ultimate Problem. In the Aztec design, God is in the little pea that is rolling out of the picture, and all the rest extends bleaker because God has gone away. In the white man's design, God is everywhere, but hard to see. The Aztecs frown on this. How do you know he's everywhere? And how did he get out of the pea? You could say that if you're walking the roads of life these days, and if you're looking for God, or a piece of God, or if you're looking for a piece of the goddess, or if you're looking for some spirit with which to guide your life, you should be looking down. For if God's going to be found these days, it's going to be in small things. It's going to be close to the ground. It may even be below the ground. Looking for God these days requires the willingness to investigate the small, to descend, to look down, to look down, to look down. An initiatory event occurs when a person goes down a road they didn't intend to go down. When a person is pulled further into life than they ever expected to go. When life pulls a person in a direction they would not have chosen on their own. Those events are called initiatory. The lack of a community to set up the ritual to hold and contain and support a person through an initiatory event doesn't cause the events to disappear. Where culture doesn't provide initiation, life provides initiation. People have sudden eruptions and breaks in their life, which changes them from who they were before to who they are become. In initiation, a person begins walking the path of the rest of their life. The first step of initiation always is some kind of a break with life as it was, some kind of a separation. A child leaves its mother and father and separates from the world of the child and enters another world. A person enters a darkness they had not known before, or a person is swept up by some great spirit. For initiations tend to go in two great directions. One is the direction of ascent, what I call an initiation by fire, an initiation in the hands of a spirit. And in that case, a person is pulled into great contests, into conflicts, into great ambitions, of flights of fancy and flights of creativity and also flights of aggression. And that's called an initiation through the spirit. In that case, something breaks out of a life. A life breaks open and a fire comes through. The other great direction of initiations are descents. They're fallings. They're breakdowns rather than breaking outs. They're periods of loss. They're periods where a person is gathered by some dark wind and pulled into watery regions or taken down labyrinth paths that seem to have no ending. In those initiations, a person doesn't know where they are. They don't know where they're going. They know only that they don't know. Those are initiations by water, initiations by loss, initiations by descent, and they tend to be on the roads into the depth of the soul. Now we're going to go wandering on these roads of fire and roads of water, following a story on each road. And since the fire is hot and impatient, the fire usually comes first. And so we're going to go looking on the roads of fire for one of these initiations by spirit. And little advice to anyone stepping on the road. To find a way into a story, you follow a detail, or you let a detail come and get you. It's not necessary to understand the entirety of a story. As a matter of fact, when a story is understood, it dies. These old stories live because no one understands them completely. A story is a storehouse, and inside a story are stored many things that people have known about the depth of the psyche for many years. Inside a story are stored many whisperings from spirits, from men, from women, from preachers, from deities, from things aged past and long forgotten, waiting to be awakened by the steps of anyone who would go down the narrative path. Here we're going now, walking on this road into the land of fire, a road into eruption. And it was once upon a time when there was a man who was a simple man who made his living by going into the forest and cutting trees, gathering the wood, taking it back to the village and selling it there to make a small living. And that man was a father, and he was a father because he had a son. And though he was poor, he was determined to send the son for an education so that the son could grow into life and have a greater life and be a greater figure in life than himself. And so he saved small amounts of money from the wood that he was always, and soon he saved enough money to send his son off to school. The son, for his part, all along was growing, as children are wont to do, and one day the son was old enough to go to the university, and so he took the money that the father had saved and went off to the university. There, he was bright, he was serious, he was attentive, and so he did well in his courses, and the teachers all liked him as well. And he got halfway through this education that he was seeking when his father's money ran out. And though the story is old, the conditions are similar to what they are now. When the money runs out, the education disappears as well. And so the teachers sent the son home. He came back to the hut of his old father, the poor woodcutter, and told his father that the money had run out, the education had gone but halfway. And the father said, well, it's a shame. And the son said, I don't think so. All hope is not lost. Besides, I don't mind returning and working as you do in the woods. And the father says, you may not mind, but it's unlikely that you're built for the task. For working in the woods is hard work, and someone off getting an education like yourself is unlikely to prosper doing it. And nevertheless, I would like to go with you and cut wood in the forest. And the father said, well, there's another problem as give a gift, but no one came. 500 years ago, I said, if anyone would let me out of this bottle, I would wish them well, and I would say a prayer for them and turn and go on my way. But recently, it occurred to me, I have been in here so long that if anyone came and released me from this bottle, I would gladly, I would immediately, and I would certainly snap their neck. Besides, why do you think they put me in the bottle? Do you think it was because of an innate kindness and sweetness of my spirit? The son said, well, in truth, I don't mind dying, for I know that any person who is born must die, and I accept that aspect of life, that life itself is fatal. And I don't mind dying by having my neck snapped, but I will tell you this, I don't wish to die at the hands of someone who doesn't tell the truth. The spirit said, are you saying that I'm a liar? Are you saying that I don't tell the truth? Are you saying that I don't spit words of truth directly out of my mouth? And the son of the woodcutter said, that's exactly what I'm saying. For there's no way that a big thing like yourself, loud and aggressive as you are, could be the same small thing that was whispering inside the bottle. And there's no way that anything as large as yourself could get past the narrow neck of that bottle. And the spirit said, call me a liar, will you? I'll show you. And the spirit began to disappear back into the bottle, making itself smaller and smaller as it went through the neck, until finally it was inside, and the son grabbed the cork, stuck it in the top of the bottle, and threw the bottle back down into the roots of the trees, down amongst the moss and the old dried leaves. The son of the woodcutter turned and began to walk back towards the clearing in the forest where his father was working. And as he was walking away, he heard the small voice again saying, let me out, let me out. son stopped for a minute, and he thought, why should I trust that spirit that has already threatened me and tried to trick me? On the other hand, it's not a terribly intelligent spirit, and it's possible that if I let him out, I could trick him back in anyway, and there may be a reward in this after all. So the son went back, picked up the bottle, pulled the cork out, and let the spirit out again. This time the spirit rose quickly into the sky and stood above him, and the son said, I'm waiting now for the true reward. And the spirit said, here is a piece of cloth. I'll tell you its properties. One end of it, if you should touch it to anything made of metal, will turn that metal into silver. The other end of it, if you should touch it to a wound, it will heal that wound and make it disappear, so that a person looking for the wound wouldn't even find it. The son said, stay there a minute while I test the cloth. He went to a nearby tree. He swung his axe, made a gash in the tree, took the end of the cloth that could heal things, touched it to the gash, and the gash disappeared just as the genie, just as the spirit had said. The son thanked the spirit thanked the son. The spirit went on its way, and the son for his part returned to the clearing where his father was cutting wood once again. As he entered the clearing, his father said, what did I tell you? I told you you would waste your time and waste your energy, and now, with only one of us working, we're way behind. The son said, that's all right. I'll begin cutting, I'll catch up. And the father said, you'll never catch up. The son said, watch, took the axe, and as he began to swing, that end of the cloth that turned all metals to silver happened to touch the axe, and the axe itself turned to silver, so that when the son hit the tree with the axe just collapsed and was reduced to a pile. Because of the shadows in the forest, the father couldn't see that it was a pile of silver it had become. He just saw a misshapen, a broken, borrowed axe, and he said to the son, now you've done it. All the work that I've been doing now will have to go to pay for the axe that you foolishly borrowed from our neighbor just so that you could ruin it. And the son said, well, take it easy now. It's been a long day already. Let's go home and see if the evening isn't wiser than the day. And the father said, typical of someone with an education, wanting to quit early before the work is done, as fathers are wont to say to sons. But the son said, Father, please, let us stop now and go home. It's already been the length of a day. And the father said, you go ahead. Me, for my part, I tend to finish a thing once I've started it. And the son said, well, I would go ahead, except I don't know the way back. Father, would you not lead me back? And finally the father gave in, and they began to walk back, the father going first and the son coming behind. When they reached the hut of the father, the son said, I think I will go into town and see if I can get anything in exchange for this broken axe. And he went to the place where they exchanged silver and gold, and he gave the now silver axe to those who exchanged metals and asked what it was worth, and they said it was worth $4,000. He took the money and returned home. He said to his father, Father, what would it cost to replace the axe that we borrowed from our neighbor? And the father said, such and such, not too much money, but much more money than I've been able to earn since you've been back home. And the son said, here's $2,000 to buy another axe. And the father said, how did you acquire this huge sum? Especially, how did you acquire it without finishing a day's work? And the son explained the whole story of what had happened with the bottle at the roots of the tree, the genie in the bottle, the trickery, and the reward of the cloth. He asked his father if he was willing to stop doing the heavy work of going to the forest every day, and the father said he could be convinced to give it up. The son caused a larger house to be built for the comfort of the father, and then he returned to the university, completed his education. After that, he went into the world, and when he went through the world, wherever he saw a wound, he would touch it with the end of the cloth, and the wound would be healed. And he became a great healer, and he was known all over the world for the healing gifts that he carried and his willingness to give of those gifts. And I tell you, he would be coming by right now looking for wounds to heal, except what he said earlier in his life was true. Anyone who is born, that person will certainly die. And that healer, he came to an end, And when he did, he descended into the ground where all healers have gone before. And I'll tell you what, this story is coming near to its end, and it's going to go back into the ground where it came from as well. So we could say, why is this an initiation story? What makes the story a fire story? And I would point to the fact that there is a sudden eruption in the middle of the story. You could imagine that the tree is in the center of the story, and leading up to the tree is everything that has happened in the son's life or in the child's life that had to do with the family, that had to do with the desires of the family, the working style of the family, and the imagination of the family. When he comes to that tree, his life is going to break open. Something comes to him that is not simply of the family, at least not in the normal, everyday sense. And that thing which comes threatens his life, threatens to break his neck. In other words, there is a conflicted spirit. There is a hot exchange. There is heat. There's danger. There's risk. The story is beautiful in the way it shows that going through this risk, learning how to handle it, learning how to contain it, how to let it out and put it back in, leads to two great things. The wealth of things made of silver and the capacity to change dull metal, and who has survived brushes with these great fiery spirits that wait for people, and from that has learned to heal him or herself and then offer that healing to others. So this story goes on this rapid path all the way from a half education, which you could say is what the family can only offer. The father's money, the father's resources can only go halfway. The wealth of the family can only get a person halfway into life, halfway educated. And the word educate is from the Latin educare. It means to lead it out. The beginning of education is to lead a spirit out of a person, and a family can only get it halfway. Then comes this encounter with ancestral spirits, with earth spirits, with tree spirits, which whatever spirit is going to speak directly to a person and demand that that person learn to open and close his exchanges with the spirit. When a culture forgets how to set up the circumstances to allow young people to meet these spirits, the spirits don't go away. They show up in events provided by life. Instead of this encounter at the tree, a person encounters the spirit of life suddenly in an accident, in a sudden loss, in falling in love with the wrong person, in being drafted into a great conflict like a war where suddenly fire is all around oneself. There are many ways it happens, but each person somewhere in the process of passing through youth will encounter one of these fiery spirits that causes their life to either end on the spot, the neck of their life gets broken, or their life breaks out into a bigger life, which has the capacity for succeeding at great ambitions in terms of the silver, but also for healing any wounds that have come before. In the beginning of the story, looking for birds, which are always considered to be, you could say that this youth is like a bird leaving the nest. He's going to encounter one of the great spirits of life. Another way to see the story is to stand at the tree, and while standing at the tree, look back in the direction of the father, and to wind up the story with death, but also the story. It also goes back into the atmosphere of womb. There's one father to the says. In this story, you hear it a little bit where the father keeps on about not finishing things. The father, even in contemporary times, saying, you'll never fully become what you could be, or you'll never finish the things you start. Because in this condensed form, which I curse, is because that son and any other child is waiting for a blessing. They're looking for a blessing on earth, and they're looking first towards the father to get it. And it turns out that the father cannot bless the child in the way that it really wishes to be blessed. And out of a kind of a sudden frustration one day, or maybe more than once, a father drops a curse right into the place of the child looking for the blessing. The good part of that is when the child heads further into life and begins to have encounters with its own spirit, with its own destination in life, sometimes it can find the blessing that will heal that curse. On the mother's side as well, the child grows within an atmosphere within the family. The mother isn't mentioned in this story, but it is clear in the story that this is a family that is poor, that has distinct limitations. It's in some kind of an impoverishment, and sometimes you see it all the way back through the family and back to birth. And this is usually the route that is being studied and worked on in popular psychology. What happened at birth? What happened within the family to make this person feel, act, and be the way they are? But that is not the whole story. When it comes to the tree, and the spirit breaks out from the roots way below those family conditions, when the spirit breaks out that has been waiting for apparently a long time, because the spirit says it's been 1,000 years, although spirits are usually impatient. But when that spirit breaks out, everything turns. I call that an initiatory break, a break of the fire of spirit that turns the head of that child away from family. The child was already moving away from the father in the forest, looking for something greater in life, and he found it in this case. When the head turns in the opposite direction, you get the opposites of all the things that were there on the childhood loop. Where you had the family back there, you have community on the other side, the side of that tree. Where you had the parents back there, if one is lucky, you find elders on the other side of that tree. Where you had birth at the beginning of the loop back there, you find death at the end of that loop. And there's no accident in the story when the spirit says it's going to kill that son to death. In other words, our first brush, and maybe many of our brushes with the great fire spirits that come in and out of our lives, have death with them. And the old saying, the old initiatory phrase was, you can only find greater life by brushing with death. But people used to imagine that there would be more than one brush with death in life, that all of the breakdowns and all of the breakouts and all of the dramatic changes and all the radical turns in a person's life were called little deaths. And it was by brushing with those little deaths that greater life came out. In other words, the healing that's going to come into a person's life and the healing that a person can develop to give to others comes from brushing with death. In some versions of this story, the entity that comes out of the bottle is called a spirit. In one German version, it's called Mercurius, who is actually a Roman god of change, of radical change, of ascent and descent. And in North Africa, it's called a genie. And you might remember it from the Aladdin and his lamp, or it's a similar spirit coming out of that lamp that can grant wishes or cause death. And the implication of the story is everyone has within them a spirit of this type, a genie. And the word genie is similar to our modern word genius. In other words, every person has genius within them. It's only a very recent idea that everyone with an IQ over 140 is a genius and all the rest of us are woodcutters. That's a very recent and not very advised idea. The old idea was, at birth, there's a genius born with everyone. That there is a flame, as if it was a candle with a flame on it, that comes into life when a child enters life. And that part of the life of that child will be making sure that that candle, that light, doesn't go out. As a matter of fact, the tradition of having birthday candles on cakes actually goes back to the old idea that on a person's birthday, they lit a candle to remember that a genius was born into life with them. And the original birthday presents weren't brought to the person having the birthday, they were brought to the genius that was born with that person. So that when people feel uncomfortable on their birthdays, that's instinctively correct. Because you feel like these gifts shouldn't come to me, but not to me. They go fire that is greater than simple death. The old idea was every person is born with a purpose, and that sometime after childhood, a person will have a brush, some event, that brings life and death together. And in that brush with life and death, the genius will have a chance to come out. Since we don't usually pay attention to that, it can come out in these ways. You could say that all these youths who drive cars faster and faster and crash into things all the time are trying to drive into connection to their own genius. You could say that people who, instead of letting the spirit out of the bottle, begin to take bottles full of spirits and pour it into themselves, are trying to have contact with this genius fire within. You could say many things about what happens to wreck a person's life. In that is also possibly the seeds of their genius. For a genius, when it comes to a person, will break the life open temporarily, just so the full force of the fire can be seen. And the first encounters with these genie, inner spirits often can be deadly. And just as the genie rises out of the bottle, and the genie is offering rewards of wealth, you could call it, or inner resources, and also offering healing. There's a huge conversation. This is a big eruption of the spirit world that's happening to this child, or which he who was a child. For after this, he no longer will be. After this, he brings wealth into the family rather than depending on the family. After this, he is able to increase and even benefit the life of the father or the atmosphere of the family. And after this, he goes out into the world not with his father's resources in his pocket, but with his own. And his real education, or his second education, begins. The encounters with these huge spirits, which can be dangerous and often ends people's lives. Some people don't make it through this. When all the young people that you might know or might have known who are taken out of life quickly, you could say that this genius fire is blown out, they are snuffed out of life. And these encounters with these great spirits that are in the inevitable inheritance of each human being also leave one humbled. So there's a point in the story where the youth, to all outer appearance, has been very ineffective. His axe has collapsed. He has ruined the end of the workday. He doesn't even know how to get home. He has to wait for his father to lead him home. In other words, you can't stay in this great, inflated, enthusiastic fireplace very long. And he goes through a kind of a humiliation or a humbling there, where he has to follow the father home. He has to go back into the village, you could say, and the value of what he has found is recognized in the village before the father sees it. He goes and finds, in this case, because it's a European version of the story and probably has a bunch of pieces in it from, say, the 17th or 16th century, he goes to a merchant in order to be valued. Although, strangely enough, the merchant, all throughout the history of Europe, is connected to the god Mercurius, who was once in the bottle. But the merchant sees the value of what he has found and exchanges it into something that he can then bring to the father, and then the father recognizes it. So there's a humiliation or a humbling that comes with these encounters with the spirit. This is a story about a complete initiation, you could say. The narrative goes all the way from the son growing within the family hut, in this case, to going out into the world and then encountering the spirit in this great occasion that changes this child's life forever, indelibly marks this life and sends this life towards its destiny. So that when he, later in the story, is able to act like a healer, he has found the road that was intended for this child or this person in life. You could say, using the old imagination of stories, that the purpose that came into flame, that burst into flame when this child was born, is fulfilled at the end of the story when the child is a healer. So this is a story of a complete initiation, one that goes all the way from the family through the forces of the outside world and towards its destiny. You could also say that in getting through this fire spirit at the tree, learning how to use it, learning how to get it into the bottle and get it back out, that this is the awakening and the beginning of the elder that was in this child, that was in this person, that gets awakened by a spirit, and if it can live its way out, will become a tremendously valuable person, giving always back to the tribe or always back to the community, one of the sources of the founding of the community. There are many stories that don't go so well. There are many people that wind up always having to go back to the tree, finding out what went wrong. There are many people nowadays, especially because of the culture not paying attention when these breaks occur. A young boy, a young girl trying to find their way into life will have some encounter with a spirit that was not anticipated by the family. It's a necessary thing. The point of what happens is usually not moral judgment. Did they act good? Did they act bad? The point is, did they survive this brush with their own spirit? It is hardly ever what the parents hope to have happen to them. That's why it happens away from the father's workplace, away from the hut, and deep in else is around. Those certain nights